So earlier this evening, I was out at a restaurant and there was a group of 3 women that walked in that were probably around the age of 40. They all took a seat at the bar, and the one in the middle, I could overhear her a little bit from the far sides of the restaurant at the tables. And she was celebrating that she had just divorced her husband. Keep in mind, these are women who are in their 40s, making a scene in the restaurant, in the bar area, taking selfies. They're getting wasted and stuff like that. And exactly, guys, this is the problem right here, is that you have so many men being disrespected, openly disrespected and mocked. This woman over here celebrating the divorce, probably spending the guy's money to even have that night out with her girlfriends or whatever. And you have a lot of men right now who are afraid to speak out against this kind of stuff, who have been beaten down. And I'm going to tell you something right now. If this continues, if it hasn't started already, if this continues, there's all this talk about the male loneliness and that kind of stuff. I'm going to tell you something right now. Men can handle loneliness, being alone, whatever you want to call it, just fine. A heck of a lot better than a lot of people think. Women, on the other hand, from what I've seen, can't handle that at all. Even a lot of women I've known who are single, they're still posting pictures in the bikinis on social media. They're still posting all these story posts. They're going out of the house wearing makeup and all different kinds of stuff for attention. Men do not do that kind of stuff. At least masculine men who are confident in themselves do not do that kind of stuff. So my point being, even women who are not in relationships, who are single, are doing things for attention. Men, on the other hand, do not do those things because, quite frankly, they could be just fine being lone wolves, being alone, focusing on their grind. And the problem is, like with this example I mentioned at the restaurant, a lot of women have grown up with this kind of anti-man sentiment that's going to push men away. When men are walking away from relationships, dating, marriage, it is going to lead to a female, I don't even think the male loneliness epidemic is a thing, quite frankly. Like I've said, being lonely and being alone are completely different things. Most men can handle being alone just fine. If you have even 1 or 2 close friends who really have your back, or a sibling perhaps, or a father in your life, you're going to be just fine. You don't need a big social circle and distractions. So my point being is that if this kind of disrespect keeps happening, you're going to see an actual loneliness epidemic among women. The problem is, like I mentioned with this girl in the restaurant, she probably has a line of guys, sadly, a line of guys who might take that man's place. And that's a problem I've seen. There are so many men where, with single mothers, with women that have all these red flags, they will, for some reason, date these girls, take them seriously. And, I understand that for a lot of men, at least most men who are red-pilled or whatever you want to call it, it takes them getting burned by a female. Some men have to learn the hard way. But me as a friend and you guys watching, if you know someone who's like this, who you see pursuing single mothers, women with red flags, blatant red flags, you got to tell them, like, dude, this is going to end very, very badly. But my point being is, really what I see is a problem. Because I'm not saying all women are bad, but most women grew up with this indoctrination from the schools. Most women went to public school. Most women, or should I say many women, were perhaps raised by mothers who had a disdain towards men, who perhaps disrespected the father in the household. And a lot of women now are not only being raised with the idea that they can compete with men, but really with the incentive that they should compete with men. That they should try to compete with men. And I see this a lot in academia and college. I even had a conversation with someone the other day, but something I've seen a lot is women with degrees in particular, especially if they're in maybe good lines of work or a good job, that get in relationships or even get married. They want to now compete with the man, and there's all these very weird power dynamics. Keep in mind, the man could be doing perfectly fine for himself. Like, I've known people in trades who make more than the women who have the college degrees, but just because she has a college degree or something like that, she thinks that she is above the man. She thinks that she should be the one to have the power in a relationship, and I see that kind of stuff all the time. Now, keep in mind, I don't want to go off on a tangent or different subject, but there's no guarantee. Even with those kind of jobs, I've known many people who have gone to college, gotten great jobs. I knew someone personally who had graduated. This was during the kind of big tech boom a few years ago. and he was working for Expedia, making well above 100,000 a year right after college, and he's been laid off now for a few years. And no shame at anyone who's working minimum wage, but he right now is working at a Goodwill. He hasn't been able to find work for a long time. So that's another part where a lot of women, I don't think, seem to understand that, at any given moment, especially with the rise of AI and stuff like that, you never know, these white-collar jobs that they want to be so boastful about could be taken away from them. Again, that's why it's important to be humble. But I see the problem now, a lot of women who want to compete with men, especially those, like I said, that are in those kind of maybe higher income positions or jobs, or got a college degree, right? And look, I went to college, and I'll tell you something right now. In college, there was a lot of this feminism garbage that was spewed, this anti-man garbage. I remember it was actually my first quarter at community college. They had us fill out a sheet. It was for just a generic kind of general education course. They had us fill out a sheet, and it was divided in two sides and two halves. And one side was all these different labels, but man was one of them. On the other side was women, essentially saying that if you're a man, you have it on easy street, that you have some innate ability, that your life is going to be easier. Meanwhile, they're not talking about the tradesman. They're not talking about the father working for his family, back-breaking jobs. They don't have it easy. A man's life is not easy. People do not understand that. And really, that's exactly the problem. Men are getting disrespected on a daily basis. And, I think it's going to come to a point, if this continues, like I mentioned, where a lot of men are going to walk away. They're going to walk away. They're going to walk away from all of it. And when, whatever you want to call it, when the water dries and stuff like that, where women do not have these men that they can fall back on, they're going to want to change their tune really quick. Because it's certainly not going to end anywhere good. Now, I want to touch on something too, because I mentioned the divorce and stuff like that. In what world is it acceptable for a woman not only to celebrate divorce? I understand if maybe it was a case if the man was toxic and abusive. I'm not saying men can't be that. But in the cases I've seen personally from people I've known, these are good men, decent men that have been done wrong by the courts and stuff like that. Fraud and allegations made against them. I mentioned this person who was a D1 college football player. What she did was absolutely disgusting, and she got away with it. So they had split custody of the daughter. She was out and essentially said that your daughter's injured, texting him while she had a temporary kind of restraining order, whatever you want to call it. He reaches back to her and says, hey, I'm going to be there just to make sure that our daughter's okay, as any good father would do. He's met by police. This girl set him up. And what I find so crazy about this all, I don't know if it's like this in all states, but it sure as heck is like this in my state, because I've heard the same tune many times. But a woman could literally get a temporary restraining order without any reason. I think they grant it for a couple weeks. It might be a little bit longer or shorter than that. And they're allowed to text the man. But if the man texts them back, they're in trouble. Does that make any sense to you? Look, I was so furious when I heard this, because if you get that restraining order, whatever you want to call it, and you're now texting the guy that you supposedly were worried about at risk and stuff like that, you should now be the one going to trial for fraud, for defamation of character, for really exploiting the whole system. But it's a big sham. And so many men are going through this. I've even seen cases where kids grow up without their father, do not know their father throughout their whole life. And like I said, these are good, decent men. These are not abusive, toxic men. But it's because they want to, like I said, they're encouraged to compete with men. They're encouraged to have the power dynamics above men. And they just want to get back at the man by taking the one most precious thing in their life, which is their kid. And I want to tell you guys something. Because you have a lot of this garbage of even content like this. People want to say, not most people, at least people with common sense, but trying to say it's misogyny or whatever you want to call it. You take a father who has a daughter, mess with that daughter, whatever you want to call it. You'll see standing up for women like the likes of which you've never seen before. Just have something happen to their mother. You're going to see men standing up for women, the likes that you have never seen before. And guys, I want to talk about fatherhood because this is important. I was blessed to grow up with my biological father in my life. And those memories with my dad, I remember, and it's crazy to think that this was a quarter of a century ago, how time flies. But even things like going to the movie theater and seeing Monsters, Inc. with my dad and my little brother, I wouldn't trade the world for those memories. I would not trade the world for those things. And you have so many kids right now who are not going to have that opportunity because of these false pretenses, because of this sickness that is going on. Don't get it twisted. Any woman who is doing that, you are seriously sick. I'm sorry, that is a complete piece of trash. If you are going to use, like I've talked about before, a father's kid as a power grab, as a manipulation tactic, as a bargaining chip or gambling chip, whatever you want to call it, you are sick in the head. There is something seriously wrong with you. I even heard of cases where there'll be the woman will get full custody, and while the father's out of the life, they'll feed the kid all this garbage about their biological father. He's an abuser, he's a deadbeat, and this kind of stuff. They go to adulthood, and of course, as most kids are, as pretty much all kids are, they're impressionable. They don't know any better. They're naive. They haven't experienced life, so they believe it. They believe it, and they don't want to make an effort to reach back out to their father. They don't. So, really, guys, this is the problem I see, is that this is not talked about enough. This is ultimately why I made this channel. I'm very blessed and very thankful to be monetized. I'm very blessed and very thankful to have had the growth I've had, to have you guys here viewing the video. But this is serious. This needs to be talked about. I know countless men, I shouldn't say countless, but more than I can count with both hands, men that have gone through this situation with the courts, that have gone through this, that feel defeated because they grew up in the public education and they were pushed this kind of stuff like I dealt with in my college years, trying to tell me as a man that there's something wrong with me, that my life is somehow an easy street compared to women. They're out of their mind. They are completely out of their mind. You know, it's beyond ridiculous. And I want to make a point of something too. When you see this kind of stuff, these women that hate men, whatever, ultimately what it's a reflection of is they hate really themselves, their own kids. They don't have the best interests of them. They have they don't at all. And they are so corrupt. They are so really abusive, even physically abusive, I've seen in some cases. Again, another thing nobody seems to want to talk about. One-sided abuse. And I've heard people that have talked to police officers and stuff like that. They said a lot of the time, the one-sided kind of abuse and stuff like that in relationships, most of the time it is the woman towards the man. Most of the time it is the woman towards the man doing that. So, guys, I don't want to see it anymore. I don't want to see men, good men, decent men, like I said, getting disrespected on a daily basis, because there is going to be a scary reality for women that do this kind of stuff, and for even women as a whole, even women that maybe don't play part in this. Because you're going to see men really walk away. You're not going to have that kind of shoulder to fall back on. Of course, there are things as men we need to do better as well. I see a lot of men, like I mentioned, making this mistake. Getting with the women who are the toxic single mothers, who isolated the kids from their biological father. That's part of the problem too. Looking over red flags and stuff like that. Not controlling really the ability to focus on your mission and purpose, which is a big problem. Desperation and stuff like that. Of course, there are things that that men can do better. But the root problem is that it has been pushed from a young age to incentivize not only that you can compete with a man, that you should, that men are somehow innately this group of people that have it on easy street and this, that, and this and that. And you're somehow being done wrong when it's like women have it on easy street compared to men. Women, I'll tell it straight up. Of course, there are women whose lives are hard. Of course, there are women who have tragic things happen to them. But for the most part, a man's life is going to be harder than a woman. And as men, of course, it's our duty and our job to stay focused, to not lash out emotionally. But again, that's the problem too, is they're shaming men. So a lot of men are not knowing how to handle those things. They are lashing out because I shouldn't say lashing out in terms of what a lot of people think, but they're really fighting demons in silence, and they're not knowing how to deal with those things. And it's a real shame. Like I said, you're going to see a lot of men that don't want to play part in this anymore. And when that happens, I think it's going to be a real wake-up call, especially for women who mistreated men, who've done stuff like this. Like I said, the woman in the bar with her girlfriends on a Monday evening, by the way, drinking, celebrating the divorce. But as always, guys, I appreciate you viewing the video. Hope you guys have a good one. Thank you.